Hi, I'm Rachel, here a bit later than I was hoping to be to recap my birthday week of reading 2019. So my birthday was on Monday, and I was kind of hoping I had finished The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon the weekend before, except that I actually spent Saturday with a friend, celebrating her birthdays the day before mine. And on Monday I was at work. And after work I just am not reading as quickly as I would hope. But anyway, I finally did finish this 800-page whopper. This was an incredibly engrossing read. It's a real feat of world building and storytelling. Shannon is retelling the story of St. George and the Dragon in a female cast in an epic fantasy world. But it's a lot more complicated than that because she imagines different societies and religious affiliations among the east, west, and south of her epic fantasy land. There's a whole lot of detail and several POV characters. Well, really just four main ones. And we are following them 1,000 years after their ancestors put the nameless one, big bad dragon, to rest, as it were, but they weren't able to kill him because we need a few magical artifacts to make that work. And it so happened that 1,000 years after his fall, he would rise again, and this is something they figure out and then have to figure out how to defeat within the span of this book. And it was a thrilling tale and an optimistic tale about people coming together despite their differences, especially between East and West/South, because the dragons of the East are revered as gods, and they're much more in the caste of our own Eastern society dragons, that, they're water dragons, whereas the Western dragons are more like our own Western mythology of fire-breathing dragons, and they're evil. But the Eastern ones are good. And so there's a nice balance between the two sides of the coin that fits into the magical world building there. And even within the West and the South, which are united in hating dragons and that they don't have any contact with the East, they still have different takes on the mythology that led them to where they are now, namely the St. George of their story, about who he was and what he did, and religions spawned out of this based on who they believe really did slay the dragon. So there's a lot of enmity to overcome in various ways, but Shannon is an optimistic soul underneath it all, I think, and she writes about humans coming together to face a worse evil. She's also a writer who embraces diversity, which is rather heartening considering, well, this world is already hugely diverse in terms of religion and beliefs and geography, so of course it makes sense that everyone should look different too. And also there's a lot of loving relationships in here, including homosexual relationships, so it's nice to have a place for that. And it's nice to see a lot of female-centric societies, not to say that, they're a utopia, but it's a different cast on things to see women in power. We have women as warriors, women as mages, women as rulers. I have my own soft spot about preferring to see the less badass side of people. I liked the more cunning ruler type people, although I also liked the warriors and the badasses, because pretty much everybody in here was very well drawn. I guess I have a little bit of issue with the East and with Tane, our protagonist of the East, who's a dragon rider. I feel like the world building there was a little more shallow, and Tane's story, especially at the beginning, was a more stereotypical hero's quest story where she's going through her training and she's this put upon peasant girl with no family, and of course she's both abused by some arrogant prick in her class and also the best at everything herself. So it was a little much for me, but overall I think the rest of the story made up for those shortcomings. I mean, I guess part of me kind of wishes that Shannon had made this into a trilogy, you know, a trilogy of how to defeat the Nameless One again. And that might have given her more time to flesh things out. But then again, she is a very busy woman. She is in the middle of another series of books, and she put a lot into this, and it's a very compelling read. Definitely in the vein of fantasy fans who want a world to feel incredibly immersive, and for the magic to pretty much be tangible. So it took me a while to get through, but all in all, this was definitely a win of a read. I'm glad to have it under my belt. Meanwhile, I am now slightly past the middle of Pachinko by Min Jin Lee because I didn't want to drag that dragon of a book to work and back, so I was using this one on my commute, and I'm continuing to, and I like it. It's a good book about Koreans living in Japan, and a lot of the biases, societal biases and institutional biases that they face throughout several decades in the 20th century. We're in a part now where time is moving faster, and we're focusing more on the second generation. A lot of the first half of the book is about Sunja, the protagonist of who came from Korea and moved to Japan in the 30s. And she has two sons by two different men who are growing up as Koreans in Japan. And now we are following their stories, but it's so much less intense than hers in a way, because we followed her kind of more day to day, it seemed like, for a while. And with now in the middle of the book, where every chapter's like jumping at least a year or so. So I kind of find that a little disconcerting, but at the same time, I'm about to reach the end of part 2, and I see how it melds into the action of part 1, where Sunja's sons are learning about her past and their pasts that mostly happened in part 1, and that's going to change their futures. I don't think this is a hands-down incredible book. I mean, maybe I'm biased by reading it in conjunction with Priory of the Orange Tree. I think it's a really good book. I'm glad I finally got to it. I'm really intrigued by the history, and I like some of the characters. The writing is pretty good, and I will report back hopefully next week when I finish. So I'm finally getting to Pachinko in part because it was the winner of the Reading Women's Award for 2017 fiction. And next on the docket I have their winner for 2017 nonfiction. This is Hunger, a memoir by Roxanne Gay. And this, I believe, chronicles a time starting or encompassing a gang rape that she endured and the aftermath of that. In this intimate and searing memoir, the New York Times bestselling author Roxanne Gay addresses the experience of living in a body that she calls wildly undisciplined. She casts an insightful and critical eye over her childhood, teens, and 20s, including the devastating act of violence that was a turning point in her young life, and brings readers into the present and the realities, pains, and joys of her daily life. With the bracing candor, vulnerability, and authority that have made her one of the most admired voices of her generation, Roxanne explores what it means to be overweight in a time when the bigger you are, the less you are seen. Hunger is a deeply personal memoir from one of our finest writers, and it tells a story that has not yet been told but needs to be. So I'm expecting this to be very searing. I often listen to nonfiction and memoirs on audio, but I felt like I couldn't do it in this case because too raw of a subject, and I think I just needed to sit with it a bit more. And hopefully I'll be able to report back in the next couple weeks about how it all goes down. So that about covers it for me now. I hope I can get back into regular updates on this channel now that I got the dragon out of the way, and once I finish Pachinko, most of my reads that I hope to get to this month are going to be significantly shorter, and I hope I can really dive into them and finish them much more quickly, because I guess I'm going to try to continue with Friday reads throughout the rest of the month, and I also have a few more videos that I want to make, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.